I'm like so I'm drunk. That's the answer.
The name of the game.
The name of the game, Drunk Thesis.
It's not Tipsy Thesis.
It's not Tipsy Thesis. It's Drunk Thesis. I'm just gonna put that back.
Could be.
What does this say? I'm like really working towards plastered thesis. Yeah. Okay, my name is Britt, and I concentrate in English. My thesis is about representations of talking animals in literature, and like what does it mean to hear an animal talk, since they don't talk, but they talk in literature like all the time.
So what made you interested in this very niche topic?
So a few years ago, I took this class in the environmental humanities in the comparative literature department. And the environmental humanities are just like, how do we represent the natural world in lots of different things. And this visiting professor came in and talked to us about animal studies. And I was like, that's my thing. Then I took another class called Talking Animals and the Politics of World Literature, and at the end of it, my professor just kind of was like, nobody's ever really written about these topics. And then I was like, well, I can write a thesis about that. So I did. I'm just really into animals. One of the biggest things of philosophy is like, what does it mean to be a human? Like, what does it mean to be us? And there have been lots of different answers. But the main thing that crops up all the time, since Aristotle, is language. And that Aristotle, beginning with him, he's like, animals don't have language. They can make noises, yeah, but that's not language. And he didn't really define language. He just was like, animals don't have it and humans have it. So then you get to like Descartes, and he's like, animals are machines because they don't have language. They can react to things, but they can't respond. And then he has this like crazy part in the Meditations, or no, Discourse on the Method, where he's like, if I put a machine monkey and a real monkey in front of you, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And it's like, anyway, animals don't have language. I take that as a presupposition, and I'm like, they don't have language. An animal's an animal because they don't have language. So the first chapter of my thesis was like explaining all of the reasons animals don't have language and what that means for how we define language. And basically it comes down to like language is the ability to name things. So, and like understand something as it is named. So like, I know rum as rum and the word rum, and they all come together in rum. And then this other philosopher named Martin Heidegger, major thinker, also a Nazi, he was like, the animal is poor in the world. He uses the German term Weltarm, and he's like, animals are poor in the world because, yeah, they can do things, like a lizard can sit on a rock, but it doesn't know the rock as rock, and like couldn't be like, that's a rock. So then I take the presupposition that animals don't have language to be like kind of true. And then I'm like, well, they talk. Maybe not in real life, but they talk. I'm going to take a sip.
Yes, please do.
And then I'm like, but they do talk a lot. And they talk a lot in literature. And notably, they talk a lot in the literature that's like the first thing you hear, which is children's stories. And it's like your introduction to like literary studies and stuff. So I look at Aesop's fables through and I focus on animals talking, which they do in all of them, or basically all of them. And the first one I looked at was The Wolf and the Lamb, because that's kind of like the most famous one. And it's in it, a wolf, it comes up to a stream, and there's a lamb there. Well, maybe the lamb comes up, and there's a wolf there. But anyway, the wolf is like, I need to eat this lamb, but I have to justify it. And so he's like, you're dirtying the water. And the lamb is like, no, I'm not. I'm upstream from you. And then he's like, well, you said something shitty. Can I cuss?
Yes.
You said something about me that was shady, like, 6 months ago. And then the lamb was like, I was just born, so, like, that's not true. And then the wolf is like, okay, well, then your family member said it. And then the wolf eats him. But the important thing is that they're talking, and it's a dialogue, and that they're fighting for their lives, but it's through language. And it's not just, like, through, like, what animals do, which is, like, instinct and stuff, or how we normally think of animals. And so I read it, and I'm like, if you read the literal text, animals can talk. If you've heard of The Crow in the Pitcher, where, like, the crow fills the pitcher with rocks and raises the water level, these two ethologists, those are people who study animal behavior at Oxford, and one of them, his name is Bird, which is funny because he studies birds. They did this study, and they confirmed that crows will do that. Like, they know to do that. They'll figure that out and, like, raise the water level like that. So I was like, it's interesting that there are interpretations where animals act the way they do in fables. So what if we think about them in terms of language doing that? And so I say, basically, the only way we can understand fables is through kind of this weird movement where we say, yeah, they have language, but it's fictional. And so that chapter of my thesis is like, fables operate by showing a reality, but then by covering it up. I come to a crazy conclusion about language at the end.
I can't wait, but I want to wait.
Hold your horses. There's this Virginia Woolf, great writer. Virginia Woolf.
Everywhere.
So the funny thing, I'll lead into this chapter with the fact that I chose this story because I was like, no, people haven't written about it, and it's Virginia Woolf, and then I thought of the funniest pun for the title of the chapter, which is a wolf in dog's clothing. Like a wolf in sheep's clothing, but a dog. And then I started hating the book, and I was like, should I just delete this chapter? But then I was like, no. The title is hilarious. We're keeping it. Anyway, Virginia Woolf has a book called Flush, a biography, and it's a biography written about the Victorian poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning. But she writes it from the point of view, kind of from the dog. She has a third-person omniscient narrator, but it's still from the point of the dog. Anyway. And so I'm like, that's kind of an animal talking. Like, if we get their inner thoughts, that's kind of talking. Just because Ferdinand de Saussure, the structuralist linguist from the early 1900s, late 1800s, I'm not really sure when he happened, but was like, without language, thought would be an uncharted nebula. So I'm like, if you have thoughts, you got language. And basically, what I noticed in the novel was that it's interesting in how Woolf narrates dog language, because she has to do something in which you have to take like, what would a dog notice? The first part of that chapter is focused on how dog language, Flush, the dog, Flush language, notices things. And because he's a dog, he, like, notices things in smell. But the interesting thing is, it doesn't translate exactly in the way that it's like, oh, this smelled good or smelled bad, or it smelled like roses, or it smelled like whatever. What she has to to do to make animal language work in human language is say, like, she'll say, the scents were golden or crimson, or she says the sun makes the stones reek, and the grapes are wrapped with a purple aroma, and scents lie in gutters and corrode iron. And it's like, there's just this blending of sensation that, like, I have no idea what a scent that is crimson or red or blue smells like, but somehow poetically it makes sense. Like, on a level of language, it works. But the place where I find the most innovative, or I guess most successful work in which she tries to get into the language mind of a dog is where she actually, and I'm engaging with an authorial intent problem right now, but that's okay, is where Wolf takes a step back and the narrator actually says, you know what, like, I can't translate that. So I think I really posed a question of how silence operates in terms of the animal, and I say, like, well, there's a part in the book that says, the biographer perchance must come to a pause. Like, we don't, like, this animal, Flush, he smells a lot of stuff that humans can't smell. And that's scientifically backed up. Like, dogs, they got a lot more sense going on than humans. And so there are places where it's like in human language and in human sensation, we just can't get it. There's this beautiful passage where it says, like, to Flush, love is language. Religion is language. Economics, politics, oh my God. It's not language. Love is scent. Economics is scent. Religion is scent. Everything is scent. And that's how Flush sees the world. But humans can never experience that. And the narrator acknowledges the difference, but then is like, but humans can't experience that. So I come to the conclusion that that's the most important thing. Recognizing that an animal has this language that we can never understand as humans, but that you shouldn't be like, oh, well, animals don't have language just because they don't talk to us. You should just be like, they have a different language that we can never understand, and our point should never be to try to understand them. That's why I'm like, Coco the gorilla, stupid, like, whatever. Oh, there's a third chapter.
No, I know. So I'm saying,
okay.
So I think
get ready.
We can move on. I'm excited.
Okay, so my third chapter is kind of like, it's me being like, okay, so where do we go from here? And so I wrote a chapter about ethics and, like, how you should behave towards animals. And it starts out, so my question, it's a question of community and how do we live with animals, since, like, you interact with animals every day, even if you don't think about it. Like, you pass animals on the street, the cute little bunnies on the main green or wherever you live, or I saw a raccoon on the street today. It was crazy. Anyway, there are lots of animals. And so my question was, how do we share a world with animals if we don't share a language? And I'm like I'm drunk. Oh, community. So I was like, how do we share the world with animals? So I read this story called Bartleby the Scrivener. It's by Herman Melville. It was written in 1853. Incredible story. It's 27 pages. It took me 35. I'll use I statements. 35 minutes to read. Anyway, you should read it. Basically, this employer, he employs this guy named Bartleby to be a scrivener, which is like an old-timey copy machine, I guess, when they didn't have copy machines. And, like, he does his work, and then the boss is like, Bartleby, come and do this work. And then Bartleby is like, I would prefer not to. And that just sets a whole chain in motion. And then Bartleby, like, he doesn't go outside or eat or drink, and he doesn't, like, do anything. He's very much, like, he just doesn't do anything. And it's kind of crazy. And then the boss is like, okay, I don't understand him at all. I don't get it. And I don't think we're the same. But I'm his friend. And as his friend, I take responsibility for him. And I have to furnish. He uses the word furnish. And I like that word. I don't know why. I think I just like the word furnish. And he's like, I have to furnish the world for him. I have to, like, give him a space to just, like, do whatever the hell he does. And Bartleby dies in the end. Well, you know what? That's not even, like, the climactic part. So I don't think also, it was written in 1853. So if you haven't read it, sorry. So I say, like, that's how we should interact with animals. We should furnish the world for them. We should let them be. And we should always make sure that we're allowing them to be in order to have a community. Even if we don't share the same language. Even if the animal would always be saying, I prefer not to. Or, like, I can't engage with you. Or even if the animal can't say that, because we could never understand them saying that. The fact that they exist as animal and other, like, they're always saying something along the lines of, I would prefer not to. So I say, like, you should always just be like, I want the animal to be able to do what the animal does. And this isn't even, like, a climate justice-y thing. I support climate justice. Like, I'm very scared about the end of the world, 2040 or whatever. But it's like, you should always, like, when you see a squirrel on the street, you should be like, I want that squirrel to do what it does. And then Heidegger, who I critiqued in my whole first section, he had like a 180 in like the 50s and was like, I was right when I was writing earlier, but I have some new thoughts now. And so he changed his theory, and it basically is like the truth of the world comes into being through poetry. And so I use that theory to say, like, poetry can be our way to understanding animals. You have to look at animals in a poetic point of view so that you can understand them even without language. And that's how we share our world. And that's my thesis. And it was super fun to write for, like, some of the time. The rest of the time it was just like, please kill me. I'm also, like, pretty drunk right now.
Yeah.
Like, I fully can't remember the last time I was drunk. And honestly, it's because I had to write a thesis this year. And it's like, yeah, Saturdays and Sundays, I have to get up and go to the fucking Rock and, like, write my thesis. Like, literally, I was there at 10 a.m. every Saturday this year. The two questions I always get when I tell people, like, what I study, and, like, they know more, like, when I say English, and then they're like, oh, what do you study in English? It's either, like, are you a vegan? Or, like, what are your thoughts on veganism and, like, meat eating? Or furries. Not a vegan, not a furry. If I had to defend both claims, you know, the vegan one, easy to dismiss. The furry one, at this point, it gets harder and harder every day to be like, I'm not a furry. I'm so interested in furries. Like, so interested.
You could write a second thesis on that.
Oh, there will be an academic article at some point in my academic career on furries. They're so interesting. We need more info. We need more.